This happened just last year. My buddy Jimmy is pretty involved and well connected within the music community. By music community, I'm more specifically referring to the dance/electronic music scene all along the East Coast, predominantly New Jersey and New York. It's actually pretty impressive what he and his team have been able to accomplish in just 2 years. The general gist is this: their company hosts what they call events at high-profile venues, typically the most well-known club or party space in whatever city they happen to be in. Then they outsource the talent, which, mind you, is typically a very well-known and sometimes borderline famous DJ. I'm not too involved or invested in that scene, so I'm not exactly sure who they've gotten to perform, but I will tell you that there have been some huge names in the mix. But enough context. Jimmy and I go way back. I'm talking 20 plus years. I've basically known him my entire life, and he's been my best friend for damn near most of it. Because of that, he lets me, along with a bunch of our other hometown friends, come to his shows for free and hang out with the talent in the VIP section. It's actually really cool, and something I wish I expressed my gratitude for more often. Jimmy was scheduled to host a huge event the weekend of July 4th on the Jersey Shore. It was going to be their biggest one yet, and all our mutual friends were going. Jimmy invited me to come down early with him, and I obviously obliged. The two of us made the hour-and-a-half drive with our other friend Ryan, and we found ourselves at the venue a good 4 hours before the doors opened. Ryan and I didn't have much to do while Jimmy and his team set up, so we decided to get a bit of a head start on the alcohol consumption. Jimmy and his team were entitled to as much free booze as they desired, compliments of the venue, and Ryan and I definitely took advantage of that. By the time the first DJ started his set, Ryan and I were more than a little buzzed, to put it mildly. It was 4th of July weekend after all, so we felt like our degenerate activities were justified. Fast forward a couple hours, and Ryan and I were completely wasted. I honestly don't remember a time since then when I was that drunk, not even close. Don't get me wrong, Ryan and I are grown men and we can handle our alcohol. Throwing up, making fools of ourselves wasn't the issue though. It was genuinely just the problem of having lower impulse control and worse decision making. But either way, we were having a great time, at least from what I can remember. The event was winding down, and it was getting to that point in the night where you either figured out how you were getting home or who you were going home with, or both. Jimmy had rented an Airbnb really close by and promised both Ryan and I a bed, so the first issue wasn't a concern. The second problem, though, that was what was on my mind. The two of us danced over to the bar and started talking to some girls we found attractive, and before long, we had figured out who we were going to spend the rest of the night with. Neither of us are Calvin Klein models, but we're both above 6 feet tall. For whatever reason, the vast majority of guys who hang around the Jersey Shore are usually shorter than average, so being tall is an even bigger boost than it usually is. And for whatever reason, that seems to be the main attribute most girls on the Jersey Shore seek out. Not looks, not build, not intelligence, but height. Don't ask me why. The Jerseyan female mind is still something I have yet to comprehend. I'm probably botching their names, but I'm fairly sure the two girls introduced themselves as Gianna and Marcela. Us meeting them coincides with where my ability to recall events precisely becomes a bit hazy, so there may be gaps in the story from here on out. From what I can remember, it was actually Marcela who suggested we all leave together and continue to party elsewhere, which Ryan and I weren't going to argue with. Gianna handed the two of us a drink and insisted that we get on their level before heading out, even though we had both probably consumed the fluid equivalent of her body weight in alcohol already. I know that whole dynamic. Girls getting guys drinks sounds a little unorthodox, and it is, but these girls were clearly wealthy given how they were dressed. After downing the drinks, the four of us started moving towards the venue's exit. The moment we stepped outside, Marcela suggested we go back to her place, which was pretty close by, and also right on the beach. Her saying that actually surprised me a little. I was fully anticipating going back to our Airbnb, considering the guys were usually the ones to host in situations like this. But both girls insisted that Marcela's beach house was definitely nicer than whatever inland Airbnb we found for the night. She had a point, so I didn't argue, and neither did Ryan. We walked along the beach, talking the whole time. The girls seemed really intelligent and knowledgeable based on the conversations we had, and I remember finding it so refreshing to talk about something other than nightlife and whatever other garbage I'm used to talking to girls about for once. Not just girls, drunk people in general. At one point, I actually felt kind of embarrassed for being so drunk because I felt like I couldn't articulate myself well enough and looked like an idiot. That's when I realized I actually was feeling drunker than I had been 15 minutes earlier. But it wasn't a drunk I was used to feeling. I felt like my body was melting under my weight, as if I were going to collapse uncontrollably any second. My legs felt flimsy, almost like cardboard, if that makes any sense. Moving my limbs, mouth, and even my eyes became increasingly more difficult, and there was a moment where my extremities started feeling a little numb. But then, just as quickly as the feeling arose, it passed, back to normal drunkenness, at least for the time being. Just then, we arrived at the beach house. It was insane. I'm probably exaggerating because I was so drunk, but it looked like what I imagined a professional athlete's beach house to look like. We went inside, and after taking our shoes off, found ourselves in what I'm guessing was a living room. I say guessing because the level of opulence in there was just so foreign to anything I'm used to. It was decorative, but somehow minimalistic. Even those descriptions are opposite. There were honest-to-God sculptures on pedestals in there, but it didn't feel cluttered or overly showy, and everything on display seemed to blend right into the walls like they were just extensions of the room. I wish I had the wherewithal to take a picture, but again, my mind was elsewhere. Evidently, so was Ryan's, because not 15 minutes after stepping foot in the house, he and Marcela had disappeared somewhere in that maze of a house, which left me alone with Gianna. She leaned in to kiss me, and that's the last thing I remember before blacking out. Not her kissing me, but leaning in to kiss me. That's where everything cuts off. I don't remember feeling woozy again or drinking more or doing anything else, but there's a huge gap in my memory that spans several hours and will not come back no matter what I try. And the thing is, I know I didn't pass out because there are texts on my phone sent from me proving I was still conscious. There's digital proof that I was sentient, but I don't remember one bit of it. And before you say I just simply blacked out from alcohol, this was different. I rarely ever black out, but all the times I have, I can still remember bits and pieces of the night, scattered moments here and there, enough for me to string together a continuous sequence of events at the very least. Keep in mind, those were also all times where I was drunker than I was that night, so that's another reason I think a generic blackout isn't a reasonable explanation for what happened. Plus, Ryan experienced the exact same thing at essentially the exact same time, which is way too specific to be coincidental. Here's the next thing I remember. Waking up with the sun directly overhead in a random set of bushes over an hour away from where the event was. Something I didn't know yet because my phone wasn't in my pocket. In fact, nothing was in my pocket at all. Both my wallet and keys were gone, but it gets worse. It wasn't even my pocket to begin with. I was wearing someone else's clothes, and not Ryan's either, a complete stranger's. The only personal belonging of mine I still had in my possession was my shoes, and even those were messed up. Both shoes had the shoelaces removed and were soaking wet. My head was pounding, and everything felt disoriented, like I was waking up from anesthesia. I didn't even sit up right away. I just stared at the sky for a minute, trying to make sense of where I was. Bushes, someone else's clothes, no wallet, no phone, no keys. Based on my shoes, it was like I had been in the water recently, but I didn't smell like salt water or chlorine. The worst part about the whole thing was the blankness. I genuinely couldn't remember anything past Gianna leaving, like I already said. That's when the panic started to creep in. I wasn't just hungover, I was scared. I had no idea how I got there. What if I'd gotten into a fight or crashed a car? What if someone drugged me? I didn't have a single point of reference for the last 10 hours. I stood up and realized there wasn't a single landmark around me. It didn't look like a beach town, which also scared me. The road ahead just curved into more trees, but just across the street, maybe a few hundred feet away, was a 7-Eleven. It was genuinely the only thing in sight, so I headed straight for it. I asked the guy behind the counter if I could use his phone, telling him that mine had been stolen. He stared at me for a second, probably debating whether or not I was trying to scam him, but then he slid it across the counter. The first number that came to my mind was my sister's. It was the only number besides my mom or dad's I still memorized, and there was no way in hell I was calling my parents. My sister picked up right away, and I tried explaining things the best I could. She ended up giving me Ryan's number, which I ended up calling several times, but to no avail. That's when I started wondering if what had happened to me happened to him too. Drugged, robbed, dumped in some random bushes an hour away. I was just about to call the police, when what do you know, Ryan walks into the same 7-Eleven. We just stared at each other for a second before dabbing each other up. He then told me his version of things, and you guessed it, it was the same story, damn near exactly. That sealed it for us. We called the police, making sure to thank the 7-Eleven worker profusely. Fast forward a few minutes, and we're now recounting our story to the police outside the store. To their credit, they took everything we said seriously, at first. But the more we told them, the more their questions started turning. Were we sure we didn't just drink too much? Maybe we wandered off and passed out somewhere. They weren't accusing us outright, but it was clear they weren't entirely convinced something criminal happened. I told them it was unlikely we would have drunkenly wandered into a town an hour away by foot, and I don't think they liked that remark very much. I gave them my sister's number and asked them to call her. She was already tracking my phone through Find My iPhone. To all of our collective surprise, my phone was showing up in the middle of a parking lot a few minutes' drive away. The officers agreed to drive us, and sure enough, both our phones were sitting on the pavement next to each other. While it was great to have my phone back, that only affirmed the police's theory that we had just been drunk. They started saying that we probably hadn't even been robbed, that we had lost our wallets the same way we had lost our phones. We tried convincing the police to check out the house Marcela brought us to, the one she claimed was hers, but they weren't having it. They told us we were probably just too drunk and didn't remember things correctly. One of them even said, "Happens more than you think." Then they gave us their cards and told us to call if we remembered anything else. It was actually shocking how reluctant they were to even connect us to other officers that would be willing to help. They told us to find a ride home since our phones were still charged, and they just left us there. After they left, I went through my phone for the first time, and things got even weirder. There were texts sent from me to a ton of people I knew. Jimmy, my parents, a few coworkers, even some girls I had been talking to. All normal sounding stuff. Stuff I might have said if I had actually had a calm, coherent night. The texts genuinely sounded like me, but from a continuity standpoint, they didn't make any sense when considered all together. One message to Jimmy thanked him for the event and said we'd crashed at a buddy's place. One to my dad said we were safe and had found a couch to sleep on. There was another to a girl I'd been texting that just said something casual, like I was hanging out at home and thinking about her. None of those texts made any sense, and mostly contradicted each other. I realized I had a ton of missed calls and texts from Jimmy, so I called him. He sounded relieved to hear from me, saying he thought Ryan and I had died or something. He told us to stay put, he'd come pick us up. In the meantime, Ryan and I canceled all our cards, but interestingly, none of them had been used, despite the likely fact that they had been in those girls' possession for several hours. The entire ride home, we talked non-stop about what could have happened. None of it made any sense. Yeah, we had been drugged, that much was clear, but that didn't explain things. First of all, I don't know of any kind of roofie that has those effects, like an induced blackout. Everything I've read just said those drugs make you fall asleep, but again, I was conscious, as the texts confirm. Plus, why go to such lengths just to rob two random guys? Especially if you weren't going to at least even attempt to use their credit cards. Two guys who walked up to you, no less. And in such a risky place, too. Your own house. Or was it a house they had broken into? Both were equally risky. Jimmy thought we had been targeted, but like I just said, we had been the ones to approach the girls, so we couldn't have been targeted. And all this isn't even mentioning how or why we miraculously found ourselves in a random town an hour away wearing other people's clothing. As crazy as it sounds, both Ryan and I checked ourselves for incisions, thinking maybe some of our organs had been harvested, but there was nothing. Jimmy suggested that maybe they had just given us some exotic drugs, which I guess makes sense, but someone had driven us to that town, and someone other than those girls had switched clothes with us. We never got an answer, but it's not like we just forgot about the whole thing. Ryan and I ended up driving all the way back to the shore just to go looking for that house. We tried our best to retrace our steps, knowing that if we just walked along the boardwalk, we'd eventually find the house, since it was on the beach. And we actually did find it. The two of us walked up the walkway and rang the doorbell. An older man opened the door, asking us what we wanted. I did the talking. Not wanting to reveal too much or potentially incriminate myself, I simply asked him if a girl named Marcela lived here, or if he had a daughter or granddaughter around our age. He gave me a hard no, and I made up some BS story that there was a girl who lied about owning this house, which she actually found pretty funny, then that was that. I would be lying if I said I didn't walk away from that house with a sick, unsettling feeling in my stomach. I can't even describe it as fear, just a sickening discomfort, like something truly awful had happened to me and my friend that night, and I'd never get to the bottom of it. For a long time after that, I was convinced those girls had been involved in something much, much bigger that neither me nor Ryan could even conceive. That maybe they had been planning to kidnap or kill us, and decided not to go through with it at the last second for whatever reason. I know I'll never have an update, but if something else happens, I'll definitely send something. My name's Ariel, and I live in Georgia, not too far from the Alabama border. Several summers ago, I made the drive out to this small town in Alabama for a 4th of July cookout my college friend Isabel was throwing. One of those backyard setups with paper plates, bootleg fireworks, and way too much food. It was one of the better nights I'd had in a while. Good people, good energy, kids running around with sparklers, that kind of thing. I didn't leave until a little after 10, which, looking back, was probably my first mistake. That part of the state gets real quiet once the sun goes down. The drive home was going to take a little over 2 hours. Most of the route was back roads, long, empty stretches of dark 2-lane roads with nothing but thick tree lines on either side. Every now and then, I'd pass an old farmhouse or a tiny church with a gravel lot, but for the most part, it was just darkness and more darkness. I had music playing low, and I was still in a good mood from the party, but I won't lie, there was something about driving through places like that at night that gets under my skin, even when there's no real reason to be afraid. I've always been somewhat scared of the dark, so I bet that plays into it a little too. About 30 minutes in, I noticed a pair of headlights in my rearview mirror. At first, I didn't think much of it. I figured someone else had just hopped onto the same back road. But the longer it stayed there, the more I started to pay attention. It was a gray Nissan Altima, nothing unusual, except the bottom half of the car looked like it had been driving through mud. I could see it clearly anytime we passed one of those overhead lights at a small crossing. Even still, that wasn't that weird on its own. But after a while, I realized no matter how much I sped up or slowed down, that car matched me exactly. At first, I thought it might have been just a coincidence, so I sped up a little, maybe 5-10 miles an hour over what I was doing before, but the Altima did the same, so I instead tapped my brakes and let myself drift well below the limit. Again, same results. The distance between us never changed. Now keep in mind, on roads like that, people pass each other all the time. It's not even illegal in most spots. I moved slightly to the right a couple times to make it obvious that I was giving the space they needed if they want to go around, but they didn't. They just stayed exactly where they were, about 6 or 7 car lengths back. That's when I decided to test them. There was a random left turn coming up. It was what looked like a little residential road with maybe 4 houses scattered on either side. I took the turn with no hesitation. I wanted to get as far away from that car as possible. But about 10 seconds later, the car actually turned off and made the same left turn in the middle of nowhere. There was about a 0% chance they belonged on that road. At that point, I knew for a fact they were following me. It wasn't even up for debate anymore. I got this really sick feeling in my gut, like I was in genuine danger. For all I knew, I probably was. By then, my heart was beating through my chest, the same way it would if someone had a gun to my head. I don't know why, but that's the easiest analogy I can think of. I just felt so helpless out there in the middle of nowhere. I had no idea what that person wanted or why they were locked onto me, but none of the reasons I could think of did anything but terrify me. I just wanted to get somewhere safe and somewhere public, with lights and people. As if on cue, I heard that god-awful chime that indicates a near-empty gas tank. I swear to God, I've never felt so powerless. My car's old. It's a 2012 Corolla that's been through more than its fair share of problems. Sometimes the gas light gives me 20 miles. Sometimes I'm lucky to get 10. And out there, in that part of the state, there's not exactly a gas station on every corner. I pulled out my phone and looked up the nearest 24-hour spot. It was over 8 miles away. I didn't know if I'd make it, but I didn't have a choice. I wasn't about to pull over, not with that car still tailing me. I thought about calling the police, but I felt like it would have been a waste of time so far out in the middle of nothingness. Cops out there take years to arrive anywhere, and there was part of me that felt like calling the police would make the danger more real. I know how irrational that sounds, and I feel pretty embarrassed even writing that down, but I'm just trying to be as honest as possible about how I felt. The gas needle dropped to empty a couple minutes later. Not just low, empty. I tried to stay calm, but I could feel myself starting to spiral. Every little sound in the car felt louder. The road felt longer. I felt stupid for being so powerless, but I didn't know what to do to change that. I knew I wasn't going to make it to the gas station. Scenarios started flashing through my head about what would happen once my car ran out of gas, but by some miracle, I finally spotted the glow of the gas station sign up ahead. I almost cried, to be completely honest with you. I took the turn hard and pulled into the lot in one quick motion to give myself some time to get out of the car and book it inside, and that's exactly what I did. I jumped out and ran inside, barely shutting my car door behind me. From inside, I could see the Altima through the window. It slowed to a stop at the edge of the lot and sat there for maybe 10 seconds with the engine still running. No one got out though. It was almost like whoever was inside was debating whether to continue pursuing me or not. And then, out of nowhere, it peeled off, fast, and disappeared back down the road we had come from. I told the gas station guy what happened, and he offered to call the police for me. Even after talking to the police, I still felt very unsettled. I know it's not the scariest thing to have happened to someone, but there's no explanation for what happened to me that doesn't involve whoever was driving that car having sinister intentions. And that feeling of pure fear, I hope I never have to experience that ever again. I made it home and told myself I'd never drive along rural back roads in the middle of the night ever again. The story doesn't end there though. A few weeks later, something happened that made my stomach drop all over again. I was sitting at home watching the news one evening, just background noise really, when a segment came on about two men suspected of armed robbery, attempted murder, and a bunch of other things in rural Alabama. They showed a blurry still from a security camera, then mentioned that authorities believed he had fled in a stolen gray Nissan Altima, last seen headed east. When I heard that, I just froze up. That's who had been following me. I knew it in my gut. There was no way to prove it was the same person who followed me that night, but I'm telling you, I felt it. The timing lined up, the location lined up, and the description of the car was basically identical. I immediately told my story to the police, and that's when it really all hit me. My own stupidity could have prevented two extremely dangerous men from being caught. I will never forgive myself for not calling the police sooner, and it's something I actually think about pretty often. I never got an update from the police, and I never heard anything about the incident on the news. If anything ever changes, I'll send an update.